Let's sew a fabric cube or baby block. You'll need 6 fabric squares. I'm using pre-cut 5-inch squares, but of course you can cut your own out of any fabric. Take the squares and arrange them in a T shape like this, thinking about how you want the different fabrics arranged. If you are using 3 different fabrics, place them like this so that no 2 of the same pieces are next to each other. First we'll sew these 2 pieces together, and these 2 pieces. To get nice sharp corners, you'll start sewing each seam 1/4 inch from the fabric edge. You can use your needle plate to guide you, or you can mark a dot 1/4 inch in at the corner of your fabric squares. I'll just pop a clip into position to make sure I sew the correct side. So I'll line up my needle with that mark that I've just made on the corner. I'll sew a back stitch or locking stitch and then continue sewing until I reach the marking at the next corner. And sew another back stitch. And my first seam is done. Repeat with the other fabric pair. Next, we'll sew the same 2 pieces together to have a row of 4 squares sewn together. And once again, marking the fabric 1/4 inch in at the start and end of the seam. Now we'll give all our seams a good press. Now it's time to sew the top and bottom pieces in place. For that central piece, I've pressed the seam allowances out of the way so they won't get caught up in these seams. So I'll align that top piece right over, making sure all the seam allowances are lined up. It's easiest to sew with the long strip of fabric up, so you can start and finish at the same spot as the previous seams. And also the bottom piece into position. And press those seams. Now it's time to make things 3D. We'll sew these 2 sides together. Making sure the other pieces of fabric are out of the way. I'll mark the end point of that seam too, once again 1/4 inch away from the corner of the fabric. Then we'll do the next side. And lastly, the 2 seams on this side. So now we've got a cube with a flappy lid. We'll sew 2 sides of the lid in place, and on the last side we'll leave a 1.5 inch gap so we can turn it right side out. I like to sew off the seam allowances like this, as it makes it easier to fold in the seam allowances when you're stitching up the gap. So we'll turn it right side out. Easing out the corners with a knitting needle or chopstick. Then it's time to stuff it. Break up the polyfill a bit before you stuff, and this will stop the cube from appearing lumpy. I like to lightly stuff my cubes so that they're easy for a baby to grip and keep their cube shape better. Overstuffing tends to make them look a bit distorted, but play around to see what feels good to you. Lastly, hand sew up the gap with a ladder stitch, overlapping the machine stitching by 1/4 inch or so. Each stitch you sew across the gap and then under the seam to the start of the next stitch. Tie a knot and push the needle through the cube and out, trimming the thread so it gets buried in the cube. And there you have a super cute baby cube. Why not sew a set? I'm Narelle from Threadistry. Follow me for more sewing tips, tricks and tutorials. Happy sewing!